Welcome everyone to the Boston MPO meeting for today, April 14th. I'll go through the guidelines real quick, which most people should be familiar with by now. All participants will join the meeting with muted microphones. Please rename yourself to include your first name, last name, and affiliation. Please do not unmute and mute yourself. To participate in the discussion, please select the raise hand function. Find this by clicking either on the participants button at the bottom of the screen, and it will pop up with a raise hand button at the bottom, or the reactions button in the toolbar. The chair will then call on participants. If you're on a phone, please use *9 to raise your hand. If you have any technical difficulties, please contact Sean Rourke via the chat box, srourke, S-R-O-U-R-K-E at ctps.org, or 857-702-3693. Now I'll go ahead and read the accessibility statement. This meeting is accessible to people with disabilities. Zoom products are compliant with exceptions with the following standards: Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1 Level AA standards and revised Section 508 standards. If you require any additional accommodations in order to participate fully in this meeting, please contact Sean Rourke, MPO staff, SROURKE at ctps.org, or 857-702-3693. So please reach out to Sean if you have any problems. So we will first go down, and Jonathan, I assume you're doing the roll?
Yes, I am. So I'm happy to do that now.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, MassDOT Chair.
Steve Wolfer, representing Secretary and CEO of MassDOT, Jamie Tesler.
MassDOT C2.
I am not seeing John Bouchard in the meeting.
Okay.
Actually, just so you guys know, John will not be here. It will be Marie Rose. So I don't know if Marie's on yet, Matt, but you should be looking for her today.
Hi, it's Marie Rose. I am representing John Bouchard. I'm Director of Project Management at MassDOT Highway Division. Thank you.
Thank you. MassDOT Highway Division, is that also Marie Rose, or is John Romano here too?
John Romano is here.
Oh, thank you, John. MBTA?
Jillian Linnell, representing General Manager Steve Poftak.
Thank you. Massport?
Sarah Lee, representing Massport.
Thank you. Metropolitan Area Planning Council.
Good morning. This is Eric Barassa with MAPC.
Thank you. MBTA Advisory Board.
Good morning, Amira Patterson, representing the MBTA Advisory Board.
Thank you. Regional Transportation Advisory Council.
This is Leonard Diggins, representing the Advisory Council as a member of the MBTA Rider Oversight Committee.
Thank you. City of Boston BTD.
Bill Conroy here, representing Mayor Michelle Wu in the City of Boston.
Thank you. City of Boston BPDA.
Hi, Jim Fitzgerald with BPDA, representing Mayor Wu and City of Boston.
Thank you. At-large City of Everett.
Jay Monty, representing Mayor DiMaria and the City of Everett.
Thank you. At-large City of Newton.
David Kozis, representing Mayor Ruth Ann Fuller in the City of Newton.
Thank you. At-large Town of Arlington.
This is Dana Lamstutz, representing Select Board Chair Len Diggins and the Town of Arlington.
Thank you. At-large Town of Brookline.
Heather Hamilton for the Town of Brookline.
Thank you. Intercore Committee, City of Somerville.
Good morning, Tom Bent, City of Somerville, representing Mayor Ballantyne in the Intercore.
Thank you. Minuteman Advisory Group on Interlocal Coordination, Town of Acton.
Austin Sagano's Town of Acton, representing the Magic Subregion.
Thank you. Metro West Regional Collaborative, City of Framingham.
Dennis is actually just joining, so maybe circle back.
Okay, I will come back. North Shore Task Force, City of Beverly.
Darlene Nguyen, representing the North Shore Task Force in the City of Beverly.
Thank you. North Suburban Planning Council, Town of Burlington.
Not seeing Melissa Jonathan.
Okay. South Shore Coalition, Town of Rockland.
Jen Constable, Town of Rockland for South Shore Coalition.
Thank you. Southwest Advisory Planning Committee, Town of Medway.
Town of Medway, Peter Pelletier.
Thank you. And Three Rivers Interlocal Council, Town of Norwood, Neponset River Chamber.
Good morning, Tom O'Rourke from the town of Norwood, representing the Trick subregion.
Okay, and I will just go back to Metro West Regional Collaborative, City of Framingham.
Looks like Dennis, wait, no, he just connected to audio.
Am I up? I'm sorry, Dennis Giambetti, representing Framingham Metro West Region.
Great, thank you, sir. I will now go to our ex officio members, Federal Highway Administration.
Good morning, Ken Miller, Federal Highway.
Thank you. And Federal Transit Administration. And that calls the roll, Mr. Chair.
All right, again, welcome everybody. We'll move on to the next agenda on public comments. Are there any members of the public who would like to address the MPO today? I see the first one is Emily Mitchell from Bedford. So go ahead.
Good morning, thank you. My name is Emily Mitchell and I'm chair of the Bedford Select Board. For more than 15 years, the town of Bedford has been working with Mass DOT on a planned extension of the Minuteman Bikeway through Bedford's Reformatory Branch Trail. At our annual town meeting just over 2 weeks ago, the last housekeeping step in making this project a reality, confirming the authority of the Select Board to obtain easements along the trail by eminent domain, was narrowly defeated by fewer than 40 votes, leaving the entire project in limbo. Bedford is asking the Boston MPO for a bit more time to determine the next steps to keep this project moving forward. There is strong, long-standing community support for the bikeway extension. Our Select Board, Planning Board, Community Preservation Committee, Trails Committee, Bicycle Advisory Committee, and Transportation Advisory Committee, as well as our professional staff in the DPW and Town Manager's Office, have all dedicated years to the bikeway expansion, and previous town meeting votes for earlier stages of the project have passed with large majorities. Expanding and improving our transportation network for non-car travel has been a top priority and stated goal of the Select Board for more than 10 years. We were deeply disappointed that the last town meeting vote, despite the approval of 61% of voters, did not clear the 2/3 majority threshold required for eminent domain. Funding for the purchase of easements was approved by town meeting through community preservation funds. The Select Board and town staff are regrouping to discuss next steps. We would love to be able to keep this project on the tip for a bit longer while we do so. Any flexibility that the state can provide would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next person. Oh, I see Senator Eldridge has joined us. So Senator, why don't you go ahead?
Great. Thank you so much for the Boston MPO. Good morning, State Senator Jamie Eldridge, the Middlesex and Worcester District, including the Hudson Marlborough area. And I just wanted to speak in support of the amendment to the FY22 TIP that would look to improve the 290, 495 interchange. I believe this is a phase 2 improvement consisting of widening ramp B on I-290 westbound to 2 lanes. And as someone that obviously drives 495 and 290 frequently, I know that is a severe traffic nightmare and a real public safety concern that 290 westbound ramp is just 1 lane. So here to express my full support for this project and hope it is accepted as an amendment for the TIP. Thank you so much for taking me out of turn, and on behalf of all my constituents, this would be a significant improvement to that region. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator. All right, the next person I have who's raised their hand is Todd Baldwin.
I'm just hitting my button, sorry. Is the video on yet?
You wasn't, it went off, but now it's
Okay,
back
here we
on.
go. Thank
All
you,
right.
sorry about that. My
No
name
problem.
is Todd. My name is Todd Baldwin. I'm the town engineer of Saugus. I'm speaking on behalf of Saugus. Project 611999, Phase 2 Route 1 northbound widening project. Is one of the 2-phase projects discovered it's in 2-phase project discovery by MassDOT. speaking in favor of that project. It's for Route 1 North from Copland Square, Copland Circle through the Route 99 interchange, and it's currently being reviewed by MassDOT. Right now, they're in the process of updating their traffic counts because traffic counts during COVID you can't really use them. The project is progressing from the 15% to 25% design phase. The design concept will focus on the inclusion of multimodal access to and from the economic development opportunities, housing, and open space along the stretch of Route 1 northbound. I'd like to thank the board for their time and thought of reviewing this project, and I hope that you consider moving it forward. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Are there any other members of the public who would like to address the MPO today? I see no other hands. Matt or Jonathan, do you see any?
I see no other hands.
All right, so let's move on to the chair's report. I don't really have much of a chair's report other than I will say that if people are interested in going to the Innovation Conference, it will be held hybrid. We have not announced a cap, but there will be a cap. And there will be a virtual, obviously with a hybrid, there'll be a virtual option. You'll have to choose one or the other. So please go on the UMass Transportation Center website because we're already over 400 people that have signed up. So if you're interested, please make sure you register early because unlike past years, we just hit capacity. We're going to have a cap. We just haven't determined exactly what that will look like yet. So, all right. So that's all I had to say about as a chair. All right. Are there any other committee chairs that have any updates right now for anyone? All right. I don't see any. So why don't we move to agenda item 5, which is the update from the Regional Transportation Advisory Council. So Leonard, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so we had a meeting yesterday and we discussed a little bit the draft tip, although it hasn't been released. Me and Matt Genova talked with us about at least what we had discussed at our last meeting. And I just want to reiterate our gratitude for Matt meeting with the 3C committee, which started early this year in order to have some input into the process. So that's that. Now, on a personal note, if those of you who were listening closely, you may have heard Daniel Anstad from the town of Arlington at large say that he is representing the select board chair of Arlington. That's me. And the deal with that position is that well, as you know, the MOU requires that the person who is officially on the board is the executive of that town, but the person who usually represents that person is generally a transportation person, at least in the town of Arlington, that's the case. And so with the knowledge that I would likely be the chair, I reached out to the Mass State Ethics Commission and had a lengthy conversation with Ting Chu about the situation, and she also reviewed the MPO's MOU and the RTAC bylaws, and she says that there's no conflict. And in fact, the conflict that exists by virtue of me being on the select board, regardless of whether I'm the chair or not. And the deal there is that any MPO business that comes before the Arlington Select Board, I would have to recuse myself. So that's where we are. For the sake of transparency, I'm letting you know that. And I am not only a big proponent of course, adhering to the letter of the law, but more importantly, the spirit of the law. And I think, at least for me, I've cleared that hurdle. But if anyone here has any concerns about that, I want to urge and welcome you to reach out to the executive director and or the board. I don't have to know who you are, but if I know there are concerns and I need to treat things, behave differently, I'm fine with that. And so that's it, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Leonard. We will now move on to agenda item 6, which is executive director's report. So Tegan, go ahead.
Thank you, Steve. So I know we've had some long meetings lately, so I will keep my comments, hopefully pretty brief and tight today. So I do have one past and one upcoming event to highlight. The past one was yesterday on April 13th. We had the Intercore Committee's transportation meeting. And at that meeting, Sandy Johnston, in his newer role, leading our freight program work, he discussed that program and sort of how to make use of it going forward. So it was a great discussion. There was a lot of interest in the MPO's freight planning work going forward, and you will be hearing more about it from Sandy Johnston at various points in the future. And then there's an upcoming event on the 27th, which is a transit working group coffee chat, and this one will be about school transit. So as usual, the link should be put in the chat pretty soon if you'd like to register, and you can always reach out to staff if you have any questions about that. So with that, I'll just summarize what we're talking about today. Today, we have a number of items to vote for you to vote on. There are 3 scopes of work. There will also be both an amendment and an adjustment for the current federal fiscal year 22 to 26 tip to discuss. The amendment is to release for a public review period, and an adjustment, which is more of an administrative modification, does not need to be released for public comment period. And so you are able to vote to endorse that at this meeting. So if there are any questions about that, please don't hesitate to ask staff, either in this meeting or otherwise, about the difference between those. But I wanted to make sure that it was clear that there was a difference between an amendment and an adjustment here. And then another agenda item on the agenda is that we've heard from several board members that would be helpful to discuss and debrief on the recent TIP process, and namely the last meeting where you had to discuss and vote on a scenario to use in the new TIP, and also add in projects to the current TIP due to funding availability resulting from project readiness and incoming BIL or the bipartisan infrastructure law funds. So we wanted to make sure we put aside some time, and I'm looking forward to hearing board members engage in that discussion. And then finally, we'll have Michelle Ho from Mass DOT and Jillian Linnell from MBTA to provide you an update on the Commonwealth's Transportation Investment Planning Document, or the Capital Investment Plan. This is a document that is a planning document that includes all funding sources, including federal, state, and local sources. And so I just wanted to highlight for the board that the link is that that document guides, or is sort of parallel to, the Transportation Improvement Program, the statewide roll-up of that. And this board does vote to approve federal funds that are allocated in that STIP. So the SIP guides the STIP. So it is nice to get an update from them at this point. And I will again look forward to that conversation as well. And then just at the next MPO meeting, I just wanted to highlight, it'll also be a very important one. It's on April 28th, and it will involve voting to release the federal fiscal year 23 to 27 TIP document for public review. So please do come. There's also going to be a few other amendments and adjustments to as action items to vote on, as well as a new scope of work, a summary of the work done on the trip generation study work that the MPO has been doing, and then a new scope of work for you to decide if you would like to vote to approve on the next phase of that trip generation work. With that, Mr. Chair, I'm happy to take any questions.
All right, does anyone have any questions for Tegan? All right, I don't see any hands. Great job, Tegan, thank you. We'll keep moving along. So we'll head into the first of our action items, agenda item 7, which is approval of the March 13, 2022 minutes. Can I get a motion and a second to approve, please? Eric, as I assume that you're making a motion to approve?
That's correct, Mr. Chair. I'd like to make a motion to approve the March 3rd MPO meeting minutes.
All right, is there a second? Daniel, assume that you're the second?
Yes, I'll make a second for that.
All right, anyone have any questions or comments on the minutes? All right, Darlene, I assume you have your hand up voting, right? Or getting ready to vote? Or did you have a question?
Voting, correct, sorry.
All right, so if there's no questions, Jonathan, why don't you read the roll, please?
Okay, Stephen Wolfle,
Yes.
Marie Rose,
Yes.
John Romano,
John Romano, yes.
Jillian Linnell,
Yes.
Sarah Lee,
Sarah Lee, abstain.
Eric Barassa,
Eric Barassa, yes.
thank you, Leonard Diggins,
Leonard Diggins, yes.
Amir Patterson, my apologies.
Amir Patterson, yes.
Bill Conroy,
Bill Conroy, yes.
Jim Fitzgerald,
Jim Fitzgerald, yes.
Jay Monty,
Jay Monty, yes.
David Kozis,
David Kozis, yes.
Daniel Amstutz,
Daniel Amstutz, yes.
Tom Bent,
Tom Bent, yes.
Austin Saganowitz,
Austin Saganowitz abstains.
Dennis Giambetti,
Dennis Giambetti, yes.
Darlene Nguyen,
Darlene Nguyen votes yes.
Jennifer Constable,
Jennifer Constable, yes.
Peter Pelletier,
Peter Pelletier, yes.
and Tom O'Rourke.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
Motion carries, Mr. Chair.
I apologize, Jonathan. I believe we missed Heather Hamilton.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Heather Hamilton. My apologies.
No worries. I vote yes.
Thank you. That calls the roll, Mr. Chair. The motion
Please.
carries.
People should just note the chair lives in Brookline, so Heather wasn't going to be ignored. So don't worry, John. All right, we'll move on to agenda item. Thank you, everyone, for that. So agenda item 8 is another action item. It's work scope for the MBTA on the state fiscal year 2023 National Transit Database, and I'll turn it over to Bradley Putnam, who I believe will be doing the next two agenda items. So take it away, Bradley.
Morning, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm here to present a work program for MBTA State Fiscal Year 2023 National Transit Database. CTPS has been assisting the MBTA with their annual submissions to the National Transit Database for many years, and this scope represents a continuation of that work. The cost of this project is $165,000, and the MBTA will pay for this work. The schedule of the project is 18 months from July of 2022 to December of 2023. The purpose of this project is to collect and analyze data for the MBTA about transit ridership in order to assist the MBTA in making their annual required submission to the National Transit Database. There are many components to this project. One is surveys of passengers on heavy and light rail, and the data from those surveys are used to estimate average passenger miles traveled and linked trip factors between different modes. Another component is fare mix surveys at gated stations and on light rail vehicles, which determine how many passengers use or do not use fare boxes or fare gates when they board transit vehicles. Another component of this project is passenger counts to verify data of the MBTA's automatic passenger counters on board its buses. Another component is counting passengers on MBTA buses that do not have automatic passenger counters, routes 714 and 716, and also doing counts of riders on shuttle buses that are substituting for rail service. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have about this scope. Otherwise, I'd like to ask that you please vote to approve. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Bradley. Can I get a motion second to approve the work scope, and then I'll open up to questions. Leonard, are you making a motion to approve?
Yes, I'd like to make a motion to approve and then maybe a question or comment afterwards. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. And Eric, I assume you're making the second?
I'll second that motion.
All right, so any questions? Leonard, I'll start with you, and if anyone else have a question, I'll get to you right after Leonard. Go ahead, Leonard.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And first, I just want to express my appreciation for the extensive background that you provided at the top of this work program. You probably could have included a lot last meeting, but I found it really informative and very much appreciated. I don't know if you can answer this now. It's really a curiosity question more than anything else. But you mentioned, I think it's towards the bottom of task 2, that if the MBTA concludes that the data from the MBTA's origin destination transfer model, ODX, is sufficient for any reporting purposes, blah, blah, blah. I'm very interested in that model and then what the is determined as sufficient, mainly because I guess I want to understand what it is that the feds allow with respect to perhaps a different approach to providing them with that data. And so, like I said, I don't think you can answer it now, but maybe at some point we could have a conversation with our oversight committee. But excellent job on this work scope, and looking forward to voting for it. Thank you.
Bradley, do you want to address any of that right now, or?
Len, I guess it's up to you. Yeah, I'd be happy to discuss more later. But the short answer is that the FTA has guidelines for sampling requirements that all transit agencies are expected to follow for the National Transit Database. And so the way that the MBTA goes about submitting this data right now, the Federal Transit Administration has approved. If the MBTA were to consider using data from its ODX model instead of the current model, that would have to go to FTA for approval. And staff at the MBTA have been working on this off and on for a few years, and they're still trying to decide whether this would be better than the current method.
Thank you.
Is that good enough for now, Leonard? You can follow up Bradley afterward.
You can follow up. Great. Thank you, sir.
All right, Brian.
Hi, I just wanted to let everybody know I'm here. Hi.
So you don't have a question, Brian? You're just for.
Oh, I could talk about origin and destination forever, but I won't bore everybody. Maybe me and Len will talk about it offline.
All right, we appreciate that, Brian. Anyone else have any questions for Bradley? All right, seeing none. Jonathan, can you read the roll, please?
Steve Wolfle.
Yes.
Marie Rose.
Yes.
John Romano.
John Romano, yes.
Jillian Linnell.
Yes.
Sarah Lee.
Yes.
Eric Barassa.
Eric Barassa, yes.
Brian Kane, are you taking over for Amira? Okay, Brian Kane, please.
Brian Kane, yes.
Leonard Diggins.
Leonard Diggins, yes, and hi, Brian.
Bill Conroy.
Bill Conroy, yes.
Thank you. Jim Fitzgerald.
Jim Fitz, yes.
Jay Monty.
Jay Monty, yes.
David Kozis.
David Kozis, yes.
Daniel Amstutz.
Daniel Amstutz, yes.
Heather Hamilton.
Yes.
Thank you. Tom Bent.
Yes.
Austin Siganowitz.
Yes.
Dennis G. and Betty.
Dennis G. and Betty, yes.
Darlene Nguyen.
Darlene Nguyen, yes.
Jennifer Constable.
Jen Constable, yes.
Peter Pelletier.
Peter Pelletier, yes.
And Tom O'Rourke.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
Motion carries, Mr. Chair.
Jonathan, Eric's hand's still up. You got Eric, right?
I did get Eric.
Right, okay, I was just checking. All right, sorry, Eric. All right, let's move on to the next agenda item, which is agenda item 9, another action item, and again, being presented by Bradley Putnam. It's on a work scope for the MBTA on the 2023 Triennial Title VI program. Go ahead, Bradley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm also here to present a work scope for MBTA 2023 Triennial Title VI program. CTPS has been assisting the MBTA with their Title VI compliance work for many years, and this scope represents a continuation of that work. The budget for this project is $146,000, and the MBTA will pay for this work. Every 3 years, the MBTA is required to submit a program to the Federal Transit Administration detailing the MBTA's efforts to comply with Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The purpose of the Title VI program is to ensure that the MBTA provides a comparable level and quality of transportation services to all customers without regard to race, color, or national origin. CTPS completed the MBTA's most recent triennial Title VI program in 2020. The Title VI program is comprehensive documentation of all of the MBTA's Title VI activities over the preceding 3 years. There are many components to this project. One is an analysis of MBTA service monitoring data, such as vehicle load, on-time performance, and distribution of transit amenities. Those data will be analyzed for any potential disparate impacts on minority riders. If any potential disparities are identified, CTPS would work with the MBTA to determine why a disparity exists and will assist in developing corrective actions to remedy the disparity to the greatest extent possible. Another component of this project is maps of the MBTA service area, showing where predominantly minority and low-income populations reside in relation to MBTA services and MBTA facilities. Another component of this project is to compile the service and fare equity analyses that the MBTA has completed in the past 3 years. For example, the analysis that was done for the Forging Ahead service changes and the analysis of the Green Line extension. And the program will also include material provided by the MBTA, such as their public participation plan and their language access plan. CTPS will compile all this material into a final program and submit it to the MBTA in March of 2023. Again, CTPS has been assisting the MBTA with their Title VI work for many years, and this scope represents a continuation of that work. Be happy to answer any questions you have, and otherwise I'd like to ask that you please vote to approve this scope. Thank you.
All right, can I get a motion, a second approved, then I'll open up to questions for Bradley. I assume, Eric, you're,
I'll make a motion to approve this work scope.
Brian, I assume you're the second? All right,
Yes, and I have a question.
all right, so we have motion, a second, so Brian, go ahead, and then if anyone else has questions, please line up so I can get to you.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So Bradley, I know CTPS has been doing this for a long time and does a great job, and I appreciate that. I seem to remember findings in the past on this area around lack of signage on vehicles and in stations relative to reporting by the public. Does this scope include sort of a signage audit or anything like that? And if not, can it be included or should it be included? Thank you.
Brian, can you say a little bit more about what you mean?
Yeah, so the FTA Title VI requires that within vehicles and in stations, there be signage and verbiage that the public and riders can use to identify what their rights are and how they could file a Title VI complaint if necessary, if they feel like their rights being violated. The T often in the past has not had this proper signage in place, and I think it's been a finding in the past from the feds. So I'm just wondering if, if this is included in the scope, and if not, can it be?
Brian, a portion of that is included in this project. One component of the project is data collection at MBTA stations, and where CTPS staff look for amenities at each station. And one item that they look for while they're there is the notice of Title VI rights. And so that is a component of it at the stations. Checking the vehicles has not been a part of this project in the past, but I'd be happy to talk about that further.
Well, I guess if it's in the regs to have similar signage in vehicles, and I'm happy that you're going to be checking stations. I guess I would suggest you go back to the T and see if there's additional scope that can be added to do that, because if we're going to do this, I think we should do it 100% and try to get 100% compliance. But I am broadly supportive of this particular work plan. Obviously, I just think if we can do it, all the way, let's do it all the way. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, but Brian, you're not talking about tabling and waiting, right? We want to move forward and see. Is that what you're trying to say, or I just want to?
I think we should move forward with this. I guess I would just ask Bradley if he can go back and talk to the folks and see if this can be added for minimal cost. The folks are going to be out there anyway. Can they look up and see if there's a sign? If not, we should definitely add it next time. But I don't think we should hold it up now.
Okay, just wanted to clarify. Any other questions for Bradley? All right, I don't see any. So Jonathan, please read the roll.
Stephen Wolfle,
Yes.
Marie Rose,
Yes.
John Romano,
John Romano, yes.
Julian Linnell,
Yes.
Sarah Lee,
Sarah Lee, yes.
Eric Barassa,
Eric Barassa, yes.
Brian Kane,
Brian Kane, yes.
Leonard Diggins,
Leonard Diggins, yes.
Bill Conroy,
Bill Conroy, yes.
Jim Fitzgerald,
Jim Fitzgerald, yes.
Jay Monty,
Jay Monty, yes.
David Kozis,
David Kozis, yes.
Daniel Amstutz,
Daniel Amstutz, yes.
Heather Hamilton,
Heather Hamilton, yes.
Tom Benn,
Tom Bent, yes.
Austin Saganowitz,
Austin Sienowitz, yes.
Dennis Giambetti,
Sorry, Dennis Giambetti, yes.
Darlene Wynn,
Darlene Wynn, yes.
Jennifer Constable,
Jennifer Constable, yes.
Peter Pelletier,
Peter Pelletier, yes.
and Tom O'Rourke.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
Motion carries, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Bradley. We'll move on to action item 10. I think our last of our work scopes today. It is a work scope for MBTA bus delay tool ongoing support. It'll be presented by Jonathan Belcher. Jonathan, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hello, everybody. The work scope in front of you today is a $60,000 two-year effort funded by the MBTA. This is a follow-up to an earlier MBTA project where we developed an interactive tool to display bus delay by route and/or community using data provided by the MBTA. The funding in this scope will allow us to make some final changes to the database and the tool itself to make it ready to be made available to others beyond MBTA staff, with an emphasis on municipal planning staff as one of the targets we'd like to give access to for use of this tool. We will also use this funding to continue to add more information to the tool. Right now, the tool has fall 2019 pre-COVID information. We want to update that with later information as far as travel times and ridership, and have the ability to continue to update it at least over the next 2 years as ridership recovers from the pandemic, as the MBTA implements their bus network redesign following a public process. We want to be able to keep it fresh and not just static, as well as, again, making it available for others to use. There's a screenshot in front of you which shows you how the tool functions. A user is essentially able to click on either a route or a segment of a route and find out what the impact is of delay on the route as displayed through the color coding. So I hope you will approve this, and I'm ready to answer any questions.
All right, Leonard, do you have a question or you're making a motion?
I'll make a motion and then have a comment, so I'd like to make a motion to approve this work scope.
All right, Brian, are you the second? All right, so
Second.
I have a motion and a second. So Lennon, why don't you go first with your comment, and then any other folks that have questions, I'll call on them.
So I just want to say, I am ecstatic about this. I am really happy to see that you're making this available to people. And I know of 3 people in a certain subcommittee of the Ride and Website Committee that would probably pay to have access to this. But what I will encourage you, Jonathan, and we'll tell you this in the subcommittee meeting, is you come up with a research project for us, to utilize this, and we'll make it worth your effort to train us on using it. This is just wonderful. Thank you so much.
All right, Daniel, you got a question?
Yes, thank you. So, yeah, I mean, like Leonard, I think this is great, and I'm happy to hear it's being, the idea is to roll it out so that it's more, I guess, widely available to municipal staff. So I think that's great, and I see Erica's on here too, but I guess one of my questions was, or one of my comments was, if, just looking at the screenshot, if there can be some, I don't know, sort of notes about like passenger hours delay and passenger hours per mile of delay is a little bit cryptic. Like if there's a way to maybe explain that a little bit in if there's, I guess maybe you've got an about tab there. I think that would be helpful for anybody that, even I'm a little bit, unsure exactly how to interpret that, excuse me, how to interpret that metric. So if that's included, like some sort of liner notes, so to speak, I think that would make it even more useful, so that we can also explain it to the public or to elected officials on, when we're saying like there's a lot of delay here, how to describe that. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. I can just quickly respond that I believe there is some descriptive information, but also part of task 1 will be to have user training and get feedback from users. So if there's something that as an example that you don't feel is clear enough, there'll be an opportunity to maybe take that and make some more changes if that would make it work better.
That's great. Thank you.
All right, Eric.
Hi there, it's Eric Berkman, Director of Transit Priority, MBTA. Just wanted to voice support for this project. We're really excited about it, and we've worked really closely with CTPS on this. One of the things from the 2016 study that we heard and that we felt in our ongoing transit priority business decisions is that, the static tool was great in 2016. It was really a seminal study that helped us get, a lot of headway, not meant to be a joke, but get a lot of headway in terms of bus priority. So I'm really excited to have this more interactive version. And just as Jonathan said, the goal is, and kind of the reason for the delay in this delay tool, is we wanted to make sure that before releasing another tool, we had a mechanism available to update it, so that on the first day that we put it out, we can say, and we'll be able to provide updates for at least X amount of time. So I think that this is the beginning of something that we can have that's a little bit more ongoing in terms of keeping it updated periodically. And then just further echoing another thing that we realized, and similar to what Daniel was saying, that the tool maybe isn't exactly intuitive. So we did dedicate a portion of this task, as Jonathan said, to some user testing and some, training opportunities for municipal staff, advocates, even, the public and agency staff, so that, we can hear feedback on how well it functions and kind of, which features we maybe included that aren't really as meaningful to some groups, or that people wish we included. So I'm just really excited about this. I'm happy to hear that others on the call are too. And I think as we get closer, as we put on the finishing touches for this and go into some of that, workshopping, user testing, and presenting how it's used, I think people will really be pleased with the way the tool turned out, because I know I am just with the draft version. So I want to thank CTPS, and keep your eyes open for this exciting release of this new interactive tool.
All right, thank you, Eric. Any other questions? All right, seeing none. Jonathan, you want to read the roll, please?
Stephen Wolfle,
Yes.
Marie Rose,
Yes.
John Romano,
Looks like John's dropped out of the meeting.
Yeah, he told David and I he was going to have to drop out for a little while and jump back in, so we might see him a
Okay.
little bit later.
That's fine. Jillian Linnell,
Yes.
Sarah Lee,
Sarah Lee, yes.
Eric Barassa,
Eric Barassa, yes.
Brian Kane,
Brian Kane, yes.
Leonard Diggins,
Leonard Diggins, yes.
Bill Conroy,
Bill Conroy, yes.
Jim Fitzgerald,
Jim Fitzgerald, yes.
Jay Monty,
Jay Monty, yes.
David Kozis,
David Kozis, yes.
Daniel Amstutz,
Daniel Amstutz, yes.
Heather Hamilton,
Heather Hamilton, yes.
Tom Bent,
Tom Bent, yes.
Austin Siganowitz,
Austin Siganowitz, yes.
Dennis Giambetti,
Dennis Giambetti, yes.
Darlene Nguyen,
Darlene Wynn, yes.
Jennifer Constable,
Jennifer Constable, yes.
Peter Pelletier,
Peter Pelletier, yes.
Tom O'Rourke.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
Motion carries, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Eric. We'll move on to the next agenda item, which is agenda item 11. It's tip amendment 4 for federal fiscal years 22 to 2026. I'll turn it over to Matt. Go ahead, Matt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everyone. My name is Matt Genova, and I manage the Transportation Improvement Program, or TIP, on behalf of the Boston Region MPO. I've got a handful of items for you all today. For my first presentation, I'll be discussing Amendment 4 to the federal fiscal years 2022 through 26 TIP. Next slide. Amendment 4 impacts both the highway and transit portions of the TIP. On the highway side of things, Amendment 4 proposes the addition of 3 projects to federal fiscal year 2022. Those projects are on the statewide program. These projects are proposed for addition using new funding available through the bipartisan infrastructure law. As we've talked about in past meetings, these 2022 funds became available back in March, just about a month ago, with the signing of the 2022 Appropriations Act. And that act allows the funds that were authorized through the bipartisan infrastructure law to actually be spent on projects. And so that's why you're seeing these additions today. And then on the transit side of things, Amendment 4 proposes the addition of 1 project for the Cape Ann Transportation Authority's 2022 transit program. Next slide. Getting into the specific projects here, MassDOT has proposed 3 new projects for funding in the statewide highway program. Those projects include a superstructure replacement project on Route 24 in Randolph for $13.7 million, the replacement of the lighting system at the Interstate 93 and Route 24 interchange in Quincy and Randolph for $6.7 million, and ramp improvements at Interstates 495 and 290 in Marlboro and Hudson for $5.9 million. And that's a project you heard about earlier during today's public comment period. Of note, on the second project here in Quincy and Randolph, this highway lighting project was removed from the 2020 through 2024 TIP by this MPO all the way back in the spring of 2020 due to some concerns that were expressed by advocates about the proposed lighting system that would negatively impact the Blue Hills Reservation. So in the intervening time, MassDOT has worked with those stakeholders to redesign the project to be responsive to those concerns. And so the project is proposed here by MassDOT for funding with significant improvements to the lighting system in order to limit any impacts on the Blue Hills. Also proposed for the addition to the TIP here through Amendment 4 is a fare collection system upgrade project. And that upgrade project is again advanced by CADA, and they're proposing using roughly $137,000 in state funds to add this project to the 2022 transit program. This project will allow CADA to make necessary upgrades to hardware and software that are required for compliance and data storage purposes, and that will support continued communication with the MBTA's centralized fare collection service. Next slide. So today, staff's request is that this board vote to release Amendment 4 for a 21-day public comment period. If approved, that comment period will begin in the coming days. That puts Amendment 4 on track to be endorsed by this board by the May 26th MPO meeting. That's all I have, so I'll turn it back over to the chair for questions and a vote.
All right, thank you, Matt. Can I get a motion second for Amendment 4, please? All right, Eric, I assume you're the motion to approve.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Dennis, I assume you're the second.
I'll second that, yes.
All right, anyone have any questions for Matt? All right, I don't see any questions, so Jonathan, please read the roll.
Stephen Wolfle,
Yes.
Marie Rose,
Yes.
Jillian Linnell,
Yes.
Sarah Lee,
Sarah Lee, yes.
Eric Barassa,
Eric Barassa, yes.
Brian Kane,
Brian Kane, yes.
Leonard Diggins,
Leonard Diggins, yes.
Bill Conroy,
Bill Conroy, yes.
Jim Fitzgerald,
Jim Fitzgerald, yes.
Jay Monty,
Jay Monty, yes.
David Kozis,
David Kozis, yes.
Heather Hamilton,
Heather Hamilton, yes.
Daniel Amstutz, my apologies.
Daniel Amstutz, yes.
Tom Bent,
Tom Bent, yes.
Austin Saganowitz,
Austin Saganowitz, yes.
Dennis Giambetti,
Dennis Giambetti, yes.
Darlene Wynn,
Darlene Wynn, yes.
Jennifer Constable,
Jennifer Constable, yes.
Peter Pelletier,
Peter Pelletier, yes.
Tom O'Rourke.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
Motion carries, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you, everyone. All right, Matt, why don't we move to action item 12, which is federal fiscal years 2022 to 2026 tip adjustment 1. Go ahead, Matt.
So thank you, Mr. Chair. In addition to Amendment 4, as just discussed, there is also a proposed tip adjustment on the agenda for today. And this is Adjustment 1 to the federal fiscal years 2022 through 26 tip. This is the first adjustment proposed to the current tip. Adjustment 1 proposes a change in funding source for project number 609066, the multi-use trail connection and pedestrian bridge over the Charles River in Newton and Weston. This project was originally funded by MassDOT in the statewide highway program, solely using federal congestion mitigation and air quality, or CMAQ funds. Adjustment 1 proposes replacing about $2.4 million of those CMAQ funds with earmark funding that was originally intended for use by a project nearby at I-95 and Route 20 in Waltham, but those earmarks were not needed for that project. So repurposing these earmarks allows them to be fully utilized. And with this funding source adjustment, the project's cost is also being revised slightly. It's an overall decrease of roughly $140,000. And that brings the total project cost between both the CMAQ funding and the earmark funding as proposed to approximately $3.77 million. Next slide. So today, staff's request is that this board vote to endorse Adjustment 1. And before we do that, you might be wondering why we're taking Amendment 4 and Adjustment 1 as separate agenda items. And that's because certain types of project changes, such as funding source changes and minor changes to project scope, don't need to go through the full amendment process. As you all know, the amendment process is really geared towards larger changes, such as significant cost changes or the addition or removal of projects from the TIP. And those amendments require a 21-day public comment period, while adjustments do not require a comment period at all. And so in this case, pursuing an adjustment for the pedestrian bridge project in Newton and Weston allows this project to move forward sooner. And this project has a projected advertisement date here in fiscal 2022 coming up in May. And so pursuing an adjustment for this separate from the amendment process allows this project to move forward in the near term and get on with advertising for construction bids. So just a little bit of background there, but wanted to help set the context. And with that, that's all I have on Amendment 1. I'll turn it back over to the chair for questions and a vote.
All right, thank you, Matt. Can I get a motion, a second, to approve adjustment 1, please? So I assume, David, you want to make the motion to approve?
I would love to make that motion to approve the adjustment.
Thank you, David. Eric, I assume you're the second?
Eric Barras, I'll second that motion.
All right, anyone else have any questions? Eric, I assume you're just getting ready to say approve yes, right? All right, good. All right, any questions? I don't see any, so Jonathan, please read the roll.
Stephen Wolfle,
Yes.
Marie Rose,
Yes.
Julian Linnell,
Yes.
Sarah Lee,
Sarah Lee, yes.
Eric Barassa,
Eric Barras, yes.
Brian Kane,
Yes.
Leonard Diggins,
Leonard Diggins, yes.
Bill Conroy,
Bill Conroy, yes.
Jim Fitzgerald,
Jim Fitzgerald, yes.
Jay Monty,
Jay Monty, yes.
David Kozis,
David Kozis, yes.
Daniel Emstutz,
Daniel Hempstead, yes.
Heather Hamilton,
Heather Hamilton, yes.
Tom Ben,
Tom Benton, yes.
Austin Saganowitz,
Austin Saganowitz, yes.
Dennis Giambetti,
Dennis Giambetti, yes.
Darlene Nguyen,
Darlene Nguyen, yes.
Jennifer Constable,
Jennifer Constable, yes.
Peter Pelletier,
Peter Pelletier, yes.
Tom O'Rourke.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
Motion carries unanimous, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you, everyone. So we'll move on to item 13, which is discussion on the TIP process debrief from last meeting. Before, I know Eric is going to kind of lead the discussion, but before that, I want Matt, I know there was some confusion about the Lynn project, so I'm going to have Matt talk to that for a few minutes. And then we want to leave time to have Eric lead the rest of the discussion on the process debrief. So Matt, do you want to jump in real quick?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And hello again, everyone. Thanks for having me back for a third conversation today. Just as the chair noted, before we get into a larger discussion on a debrief on last week's or 2 weeks ago's decision making, MPO staff did want to take a minute to talk through one proposed alteration to the draft 2023 through 27 TIP, which was approved by this board back on March 31st. So as you all likely remember, that meeting featured a lengthy discussion on this year's TIP programming and included the addition of a handful of projects in the first 2 fiscal years of the draft TIP. The goal of adding these projects was to utilize a large funding surplus in the early years of the forthcoming TIP that resulted from the return of the final year of the MPO's Green Line extension funding and the addition of new funds to the TIP made available through the bipartisan infrastructure law. Excuse me. To that end, you'll remember that the MPO allocated $34.5 million in funding in federal fiscal year 2023 to the MBTA's Lynn Station Improvement Project, and another $20 million in funding in fiscal 2024 to the MBTA's Forest Hills Station Improvement Project. So in the wake of these decisions, MPO staff have continued to coordinate with MBTA and MassDOT staff to ensure that the funding allocated by the MPO meets the needs of all stakeholders. Those conversations have revealed that the amount of funding allocated to the Lynn Station project was not sufficient enough to meet the amount of funding that the MBTA had identified to match the MPO's contribution. So this is, it's a little bit complicated, but I'll give you some background here. And this is because that MPO funds, when you see them and we're programming the tip, are already matched with the 20% match from MassDOT on the state side. And so when the MPO funds an MBTA project, those MassDOT matching funds are replaced with MBTA matching funds. And so in this case, the MBTA requested $38.5 million in federal share from the MPO, and the MPO only allocated $34.5 million, but that is in combined federal and MassDOT share. And so that translates to a much lower $27.6 million in federal share, which is too low a contribution from the MPO for the MBTA to have full matching funds available in 2023. So I'll come back to the numbers on the next slide to sort of show you how this plays out. But the takeaway here is that staff are proposing to reallocate a portion of the funding allocated to the MBTA's Forest Hills project to the Lynn project, as this would allow the Lynn project to be fully funded and move forward in 2023. This change doesn't need a formal vote today, as this change will be included in the larger draft tip that will be voted on by this board in 2 weeks on April 28th. Staff's only request today is that the MPO allow staff to reflect this updated proposal in the draft tip unless there are any objections to doing so. And I'm going to apologize for the bad timing here, but my building is doing fire alarm testing today, so you might hear some beeping in the background. Next slide. So as you can see on the slide here, staff's proposal is to shift $15.6 million in 2024 MPO funding, which is $10.88 million in federal funding alone, from the Forest Hills project to the Lynn project. That would allow Lynn to be fully funded and still leave $6.4 million in MPO funds allocated to the Forest Hills project in 2024. Next slide. Importantly, I do want to flag that this proposal does not change the MPO's overall funding commitment to MBTA projects in these 2 fiscal years, which would remain at $54.5 million. That means that the roughly $20 million in funding that the MPO left unallocated in fiscal 2024 would remain as is for future uses. The other key takeaway here is that this proposal ensures that the Lynn project can move forward with full funding, which is in line with what seemed like the MPO's intention to advance that project as expressed at the last board meeting. And this proposal still allows the MPO to provide some funding support for the Forest Hills project, which again, this board also expressed a desire to do at the last MPO meeting, while recognizing that that project is not yet fully funded. So I know there's a lot going on here, but please let me know if you'd like me to clarify anything. And if there are no concerns for this proposal, then staff would propose that we just move forward with including this in the draft 23 through 27 tip, which again, you all will see in 2 weeks. Thank you.
So Matt, basically, we're not taking a vote. We're just looking for consensus before people see the full tip. Okay. So Jillian first and then Brian.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to MPO staff and MassDOT staff for helping us work through this. As I think we all recall the meeting, this is new for all of us. And so I really appreciate as an open mind to helping us work through some of the kinks about what the numbers mean on the different documents when we're comparing them to each other. So we hope that this proposal, which we think is in the spirit of what we heard at the MPO meeting, is accepted. But please let us know if you have any questions. We're happy to address them. And thank you again for all of the support.
All right, thanks, Jillian. Brian?
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, just to follow up and say this does comport with the sense I had 2 weeks ago. And I think it does accurately reflect the sense of the MPO 2 weeks ago. So I suggest that we just move forward and vote on this thing in 2 weeks. Thank you.
All right, others would like to weigh on this. Is anyone opposed to doing this, or is there general consensus this makes sense? And obviously we'll talk about this at the next meeting when the full tip is taken up. All right, I don't see any comments or questions, people raising their hands. So I believe, Matt, that you have the consensus to put this in as you have presented today for the tip discussion, next tip discussion. So thank you for that, Matt. So now to talk about the debrief of the last meeting, I'm going to turn it over to Eric. So Eric, why don't you take over?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, so I felt at the last meeting that that the sort of process of sort of reviewing sort of some of these projects, for the first time was a bit rushed. And I'm really interested, and I really want to thank the chair and MPO staff for carving out time to just have a little discussion about that, particularly for, I think, some of our newer members. There's a number of factors that have come together, I think, that have made this tip year a little unusual. One being a couple of projects like the Rutherford project having to get pushed back. The increase in federal funding meant that we had a lot of unprogrammed funds in these near fiscal years, the current fiscal year 22 and 23 and 24, and not having a lot of projects that are ready that could come in and fund those projects. So, MassDOT and the MBTA did come forward at the last meeting. Unfortunately, it was the sort of the day of, and we were, kind of required to make a decision, at the last meeting. And I had heard from a few members who were a little confused about the timing, confused about just the projects, and sort of being seeing projects for the first time. So I wanted to carve out some space here just to be able to hear from any members their thoughts about this, kind of highlight, this is just a process challenge, and maybe talk about, what potential solutions, or maybe even a process for identifying ways that we can do a better job, in the future when we have these types of situations before us. So I'm really interested in just kind of creating some space to hear from other MPO members about the kind of the process of making some quick decisions, seeing projects for the first time, with an understanding and a recognition that we had a circumstance before us where, again, like I said, projects increasing, needing to get pushed back because of readiness, increase in federal funds, but really interested in having the time now, because we didn't really have the time to have this conversation at the last meeting. So, Mr. Chair, if you want to call on people, I'm happy to do that too, however you'd like to, proceed with this conversation. But really want to just create the space to hear from other members if folks would like to say anything.
I can call on people, Eric. But thank you for setting that up. This important discussion we want to try to have today. So, does anyone have comments? So I see Brian has one. So just please line up with any comments or questions folks have, because we want to, it's important that we provide the space to have this discussion. So I'll call on Brian, Peter, and then Dennis.
Thanks, Steve, and thanks, Eric, for bringing this forward. It definitely is a discussion that we need to have, and I think sometimes as we're sort of in the middle of what is both a marathon and a sprint, that is the tip, we sort of lose track of the process and the bigger picture, which is consensus building. So I give you a lot of credit for bringing this up. I think there is definitely a desire and a need to put some sort of guardrails in place to check ourselves and make sure that we are also going through the proper procedures and having that consensus. Because at the end of the day, that is what this organization, this board is all about. And so I guess, I have some ideas about sort of practical solutions, but I'll sort of save that maybe because I'm very curious to hear from my colleagues kind of their thoughts as well. So thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Peter, you're up.
Hey, thank you. Yeah, I would agree with what Brian was saying as well, and echo the same thing. I think it's just good practice to have a buffer between when we have to vote on these things and on these projects, and when the projects are available with the descriptions. So some kind of like a guardrail, like Brian brought up, of giving us an opportunity to review a project like that when we have that extra funding available so that we can make an informed decision and we're not rushing into things without that information.
All right, thank you, Peter, for that. Dennis, and then Darlene.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I have to echo the previous comments. I did feel a little uncomfortable and challenged trying to figure it all out the last meeting. I've served on other boards where these issues do come up and they're sometimes unique. But the solutions I've seen in other board environments would be that when something comes up and the background information is, not timely as far as giving board members enough time to review it, that there's at least a vote to accept and to present that and bring that thing forward. So there's a formal way of having that discussion. Because it is difficult for us and there's some, big decisions that we make. And we should err on the side of making the right decision, having the information at hand. So having some sort of process, I would be much in favor of. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dennis. Darlene, you're up.
I don't actually have too much to add beyond what has been said before, just sharing the same viewpoint that I think these are situations that are sometimes unpredictable, but I would typically try and avoid in staffing my boards locally, who would probably revolt on me if we were in a similar situation. But I understand the sensitivity and the timing and how we can't always have everything line up correctly, but I would feel more comfortable having more time to be able to review material and not make a vote immediately, and putting some procedures in place for, hopefully this is, it's not a bad problem to have, but having additional money, but having something in place would be helpful.
All right, thanks, Darlene. Ken, and then Jim Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Steve. I just want to remind folks of the federal requirements regarding the schedule and the timing of TIP adoption. As you know, as you may know, federal requirements, federal fiscal year ends on September 30th. So the requirement is to have an endorsed TIP in place by the end of the before the next federal fiscal year, meaning the end of the current federal fiscal year, which is the end of September. Now, the reason that TIP development typically in Massachusetts is now in the spring around this time is because of the desire to have the TIPs in place so that the state can develop their CIP, which Steve is on a state fiscal year basis, which starts July 1st. So everything and all the MPOs in Massachusetts do the same thing. They develop the TIPs in the spring so that they can be in place before July 1st. And it makes sense so that the CIP and the TIPs, so that the TIPs can be brought into the CIP. It makes sense. But just I want to remind folks, there is no requirement on a federal side that the TIP be in place this early. But it does make sense, and you may want to think about whether you actually have a little time or not when these kinds of situations arise. And I think Brian hit on I think perhaps the fundamental issue, which is that the MPO does not have a bank of projects that are far enough along in the project development process that you can call on when funding is available or other projects are delayed. And I have some thoughts about that. I know, Brian, you were, I guess maybe we're not getting into that at this point, but I have some thoughts about how the MPO could maybe address that issue also. So when it's appropriate, I'd be happy to participate in that discussion also. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The only thing I would add, Ken, or play off what you just said, Ken, obviously, there's been a ton of work to try to have the tip and the CIP put together, and there's a lot of sense. And if there was ever a discussion to be had on that, it wouldn't just be with the Boston MPO, it would have to be across all the MPOs. So, but I know, having been one of the folks that have worked at it hard to try to make it actually be more transparent for everyone at the same time, there's a ton of work to make that coordination between the two documents. So, but thanks, Ken. All right, Jim, and then Leonard.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just echoing what everyone said. I mean, I guess we all understand that things are moving fast, but even just getting the consideration of the new projects a few days before, just emailed out, would have been helpful. Because, a little frustrating to try to digest what they are and make decisions. Some of which I think we're in the city that I think we weren't even on the city side. We're kind of ready to be programmed and move forward. So, but thank you.
All right, thanks, Jim. Leonard, did you drop out, or do you still want to speak, Leonard? I see a hand went down.
I still want to speak. I mean, sorry, it was an accident. I mean, so I
right,
wanted, yeah, thank you. I mean, so I'm interested in Ken's ideas, you know, and so if today isn't the day to hear from them, I mean, I like to formally request that we put it on an agenda so that we can hear those ideas, because the advisory council has been thinking about this a whole lot too. So that's it. Thank you.
Leonard, just so I'm clear about Ken, you're talking about having a bench or having projects ready to go? Is that what you're talking about? Okay.
Yeah.
All right, I just wanted to be clear.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you.
All right.
Mr.
Yeah,
Chair,
Eric, go ahead.
I
Yep.
think, yeah, and I'd love to hear, I mean, I think what Ken's talking about is sort of, you know, like, what are the ideas when it comes to projects? What's the ideas when it comes to, you know, the timeline? So that's an interesting idea. I also would welcome carving out some time, you know, for that conversation at some point as well.
All right, Ken and then Brian.
Thank you, Steve. There was something I wanted to add, and that is, I did want to mention also that the targets, remember, the targets are a construct of the state and the Massachusetts Association of Regional Planning Agencies, whereby we sort of, you know, the sort of informal agreement that you know, the MPOs get about a third of the available funding, and the state gets about 2/3, and that's in line. If you look at the way the funding categories come to the state, federal funding categories, that's sort of in line with the planning regulations, which require the states to select projects in certain categories and MPOs to select projects in other categories. Project selection is a term that's a little bit different from sort of arcane. I won't get into it, how that's different from programming, but that 1/3, 2/3 is sort of in line with the way it becomes. But that is not a federal requirement that 1/3, 2/3, and if there is no I've mentioned this before, and I'm not sure if people, I may not have been clear, but that doesn't mean that in any one year it can't be more or less than 1/3 or 2/3, or that targets can't be flexible. And in some years the state spends more money, and other years the MPO spend more money, and you can sort of make it even out over years. It doesn't have to be static year by year exactly the same. So then that may be another opportunity, that if the state has more projects ready to go in one year, you reduce the targets, and the next year you increase the MPO targets when MPOs have the projects available, and you make it all work out. So there may be opportunities there also that could be useful. Thank you.
So again, Ken, I'm just going to raise that this is a bigger issue for than just the Boston MPO, but also want to remind folks that the state has actually done that often, where if we have, you know, we've actually brought state money to projects to help out regional. So there's kind of a precedent for that anyways, Ken, you know, we do that. But
right,
obviously this is all.
That's right. You picked up Route 9, for example, Route 9 and 27, right? You decided.
Right. So, but just, you know, adding it to the list of things we will probably have a discussion later on about. Brian.
Thanks, Steve. So yeah, Ken mentioned he and I have been trying to connect for the last couple of weeks, just schedules being crazy, we haven't about a lot of things that have to do kind of with MPO operations, and that's all within the context of the MPO operations plan, which we heard about, I think, last meeting, and which this body referred to the A&F committee, which I chair. And I guess I would suggest that we add this topic kind of to that or to the A&F committee. This is definitely a subject of administration, and it has to do with timing. And I think that's a place where we can kind of get into it a little more with a smaller group and kind of put our heads together and figure out exactly what the processes and procedures not only are, but what they should be. And I think that's, I think, you know, that's a good place for this to go. And of course, we invite everyone to participate in that. It's not just for the members. We would love to have that. And I think we're actually going to start meeting early next month, kind of on a regular basis. So if folks are comfortable, you know, I suggest we refer this there, and then, you know that we'll report back very, very often. Thanks.
Thanks, Brian. Eric?
So Brian, are you proposing this could be part of the operations plan discussion that's happening at the A&F committee? That could make a lot of sense as a sort of an operations issue.
Yeah, I was as clear as mud there, wasn't I? Yes, that's what I'm suggesting, Eric.
So is there a general consensus, at least that the administration committee, subcommittee should take a look at this? Is that what people are generally in favor of?
Yeah, in the context of the overall operations plan.
Right. And just, Brian, is if this is where we land, which I think is fine, then just, you know, we need to make sure we parse out what discussions are within the region, and then other need to have other MPOs involved. So, because that, you know, it's not straightforward, this discussion. So just to reiterate.
Sorry, Steve, there's other regions in Massachusetts, what?
All right, Brian, let's not put that on the meeting minutes, whoever's doing them. Yeah, Eric.
Yeah, I do think that, I think there's a few different issues here. There's the, I think, you know, one is sort of the timing of the TIP vis-a-vis the state CIP, which I would agree with you. There are certain, you know, desires to coordinate, and there makes a lot of sense there. And so there's only so much flexibility. There's, I think there's the issue of just getting materials to MPO members beforehand, which we could, you know, think about from an operational standpoint, like, what does that mean? You know, Peter mentioned, you know, like 48 hours or something like that. And then I think there's the issue of, which I think is a bigger issue and less directly in the MPO's kind of control, which is about project readiness. But happy to have all of those conversations just with an understanding what are the things that are more in the MPO's control and things that are kind of less in directly in the MPO's control. But I think that would be appropriate to have it as part of the operations discussion.
Yeah, I agree with you, Eric. I think you parsed out better than I. My only point is some of these discussions, like Ken bring up the MARPA formula and how it gets distributed, can't be just held at one MPO. There has to be more members as part of that. So that's what, so you said it better than I, but that was my point. Some of these discussions need to have more stakeholders as part of it. But obviously there's some in here, as you pointed out, Eric and Brian did, that are wholly within the Boston MPO to try to make, whether it's project development or timelines of getting materials and stuff, that's totally appropriate for the MPO to look at and weigh in. So thank you for saying that better than I did. Yes, Tom Bent.
Again, I agree with what's been said here, but I'm going to show how long I've been on the MPO. This, I know this year was kind of unprecedented. We had to deal with a lot of things without a lot of notice. And it also happened back when the ARA funding came in. It's very similar. It might have been worse then because we were trying to scramble with a lot of projects that weren't, shovel ready. Remember, that was the big term at the time. So it has happened before. Luckily, it doesn't happen every year, but I remember living through that too, and we probably had a similar conversation as we're having right now. But I just wanted to at least bring that up, but it wasn't totally unprecedented. It has happened before.
That's actually good context, Tom, about when we went through this with ARA, it was kind of kind of a whirlwind too, and this is similar. So that's a really good context for folks. So
And thank you, MassDOT, for not bringing a pedestrian bridge at Foxborough.
Eric, you know that's a sore point for me because I had to chair the meeting because David was out sick. So I don't want. I'm not talking about that at all.
I
So
forgot about that.
thanks, Eric. Anyone else want to speak, especially anyone who hasn't spoken yet? All right, so I don't see other hands, so let's move on to the next agenda item. But obviously, Brian, you've got some feedback that you guys should think about how you would look at this in that subcommittee, kind of maybe have, you know, some thoughts and meetings with your committee members, and then maybe an update, and then we'll see where we go from there. And obviously, MassDOT will consider all the other discussion, you know, points that came up that are more global in nature. And obviously, I'm sure we'll be talking about it again in the future. So thank you, everyone, for having this. Eric, thank you for leading the conversation today. And I'm sure we'll be revisiting some of this. So I thank everyone for their comments today. So with that, we'll move to agenda item 14, which is the 22-26 TIP Development State CIP update. And it's a combo between Michelle Ho from our office up in planning and Jillian L from the T. So I will let Michelle and Jillian figure out how they're going to do this, but I'm turning it over to you two.
Thank you, Steve. I think I'm the one going first, and Jillian will follow. Could we go to slide 3, please? Next slide. So for MassDOT, I'm going to talk about the MassDOT capital investment plan process this year for 23 through 27. So we continue, the plan continues to center on the strategic framework which we established in prior plans, with 3 key priorities, that being reliability, modernization, and expansion, or providing diverse transportation options. And just to refresh the Boston MPO committee, reliability is really our state of good repair investments that go to maintaining our existing system and providing a safe, reliable system for all users. Modernization really takes the state of good repair investments and modernizes them, makes the transportation assets more accessible, and goes beyond just a state of good repair type investment. And finally, expansion really focuses on providing diverse transportation alternatives or expanding the capacity of the overall transportation network. Underneath the priorities, the 3 key priorities, we have a number of investment programs which are really aligned with the strategic priorities that we've established, and they're focused on particular goals for the agencies that we're trying to accomplish, our performance targets, our federal and state performance targets for our various assets. And then underneath all of that, we select projects that best achieve those goals that we've established and align with all of our overall objectives. This year, we're returning to a 5-year capital plan. The prior 2 years for FY21 and FY22, those were both 1-year plans, more maintenance of effort plans due to the pandemic and uncertainties within the network and the revenue streams available. We have launched the development of a new statewide long-range transportation plan, and we would expect that when that plan is more fully baked and completed, we will do a full revamp of the capital investment plan that will align with what we've learned during the development of the statewide long-range plan. We all know that the pandemic impacted how people traveled and how they used outdoor spaces. So we have revisited some of our priorities and our previously planned and program investments, and have incorporated changes in the development of this 5-year capital plan for 23 to 27 as a result of what we've learned. Some of the programs that we had launched as a result of the pandemic, particularly our municipal shared streets and spaces program, will be continuing. We're going to continue that program going forward. And finally, obviously, as you all well know, at the Boston MPO, there's a lot of new federal formula funding that Massachusetts has benefited from in the 23 through 27 CIP. We'll incorporate all of the projects programmed using this new federal funding that are programmed in the STIP, and that will be reflected in the 23 through 27 capital investment plan. Next slide, please. So we have key strategic goals for our plan. Safety for all users of our system, climate stewardship, investments that really support our commitment to decarbonizing mobility and adapting our infrastructure to meet climate challenges in the future. Equity, it's key to that our CIP investments support equal access to mobility and opportunities of all kind, and obviously responsible asset management. So our investments are looking to support the preservation of our assets and modernizing and adapting those assets to meet new needs and challenges. Next slide, please. So some of the key changes I touched on that we will be incorporating all the new federal formula funding that has been authorized under the bipartisan infrastructure law, otherwise known for the acronym in this discussion as bill, with the corresponding state match. And obviously, one of the significant increases that the Commonwealth did receive this year was the new formula funding to improve the condition of the Commonwealth's bridges, the $1.125 billion. We also are including the new formula funds that support climate change mitigation through carbon reduction in the electric vehicle charging infrastructure. And finally, the protect funds, the formula funds that address resiliency of our assets. The bill also included a significant amount of authorization for what we call the discretionary and competitive grant programs, approximately $110 billion. The Commonwealth anticipates to aggressively pursue applications that could utilize that discretionary grant funding. For the CIP, we have not included any assumptions in the CIP for discretionary grant awards. Our policy has in the past has been that we only include a discretionary grant once the grant has been awarded to the Commonwealth. And we would obviously include those. Should any grants be awarded to MassDOT, those would be included in future CIPs. The other key change, and one that Jillian will talk about next, is that the MBTA is developing and presenting their own standalone CIP since they have a new MBTA board. So the MassDOT CIP only reflects some of the Commonwealth funded investments funding that goes directly to the MBTA to support their expansion project and efforts that are funded under the Rail Enhancement Program. Those are for South Coast Rail and GLX and Red and Orange Line vehicles. So by and large, the MassDOT CIP is a standalone MassDOT CIP for the MassDOT divisions this year. Next slide, please. We do have a couple new programs that we are proposing for this coming capital plan. We have a municipal electric vehicle charging infrastructure grant program, and this would provide funding to municipalities and regional transit authorities for the integration of electric vehicles and the equipment, electric vehicle support infrastructure equipment in their communities. It was authorized in the 2021 transportation bond bill, but not funded in the FY21 CIP. 25 million was authorized under the transportation bond bill, and we are proposing to fund over the next 5 years 25 million in new grant awards for this program. The Commonwealth did receive 63.5 million in new federal formula funds for the deployment of electric vehicle charging and infrastructure and the establishment of an interconnected network of facilities across the Commonwealth for EV charging. We are required to submit a charging plan for how we would use those funds to US DOT by August and that has to be approved in order for us to actually program the funds. Those are the two new programs that we have for this capital plan that we will be releasing in May. Next slide, please. So I think everyone's well aware of all the new funding that we are getting. And this just sort of highlights, again, the new federal funds that we will be incorporating into the Commonwealth's capital investment, MassDOT's capital investment plan for 23 to 27. I do want to highlight that we are including approximately 150.8 million that we received in 21 under the Federal Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act, otherwise known as CRISA. That will be programmed as part of the 23 through 27 STIP, and that will be reflected in the overall CIP that we produce. Another source of funding for MassDOT for its capital plan is the state funds that we receive from the Commonwealth, from the Executive Office of Administration and Finance. They gave us preliminary estimates in February. They have indicated and agreed that they would fund the additional state match for the incremental federal formula funds that we are receiving as under bill. And we also submitted requests for additional funding to A&F, which we're finalizing the details of what will be finalized and included in their capital plan to support our initiatives. Another key source of funding for MassDOT that is not in the federal plan is our PAYGO capital funds. Those are the net toll revenues after operating expenses for our 3 toll facilities, the Metropolitan Highway System, the Western Turnpike, and the Tobin Bridge. Those estimates have been developed and included in the overall CIP and are used for capital projects on the appropriate toll facilities. We do the estimates in conjunction with our fiscal department as we finalize our FY23 operating budget. Next slide, please. This is just a snapshot of what we're showing currently as program spending for the next 5 years. It's approximately $14 billion for MassDOT. This does include that portion of the Commonwealth funding that goes to the T, the REP spending that Jillian will talk about. It's about $1 billion for the REP funds for the MBTA over the next 5 years. And because we only published a 1-year CIP last year, I wanted to just give you a comparison of how FY23 spending compares to what we had programmed last year for FY22. And as you can see, we had 2.5 billion last year. In 22, we have about 2.7 billion this year. That increase really does reflect the additional federal funding that we are receiving and the state match that corresponds with that. The other source of funding I just wanted to highlight is that this year we are actually programming over the next 5 years a significant draw on the next generation bridge GANs grant anticipation notes that were authorized under the 2021 bond bill. About $570 million of GANs are proposed to be programmed in this capital plan, again, to support the highway bridge program. We do have a robust highway bridge program this year in the capital plan because we have received a significant amount of new federal money, and we are also programming, starting to program the GANs. Next slide, please. There was some discussion earlier about how the CIP and the STIP align, and I think it is important for us to touch on just what the differences are between the two plans. Since we developed 2 5-year plans, the STIP is really dedicated to all of the federally funded roadway and transit projects for the MassDOT, the RTAs, and MBTA and MPOs. It's subject to federal approval, and it is constrained by your federal fiscal year from October to September 30th. All the projects that are programmed in the STIP are brought into the overall CIP that we develop. The STIP, though, is an obligation document. It reflects the programming of the funds versus while the CIP, on the other hand, reflects the expenditure of those funds over time. So the CIP is a spending or cash flow document. It does, as you know, the STIP includes all of the federal aid programs, programmed by all the metropolitan planning organizations and the transportation planning organizations in the Commonwealth. And the CIP, on the other hand, as we went through in the earlier slide, does identify all sources of funding, not just the federal funds. the program that are used to support all of our capital transportation investments in the Commonwealth. And we also include all of the state capital funding for the divisions that don't necessarily have a significant portion of their program funded by the federal funds. Those that are like the rail group or the registry of motor vehicles, some transit investments in our information technology group. Those investments are 100% funded by the state. Next slide, please. So there was some discussion just a little while ago about how and when we align the CIP with the STIP development process. And as Steve mentioned, we have done a lot of work to try, and as Ken Miller also mentioned, we have moved up the timetable for developing the overall STIP so that more closely aligns with the development of the CIP. This was in an effort to make sure that we are capturing all of the projects that you are programming for, say, by the Boston MPO, and your tips are reflected in the overall CIP. As when we publish our CIP, we want to make sure that we have captured all of the federally funded projects in the overall CIP. So this graphic is just an illustration of all the work that we do by month over the year to really align the two planning processes, so we make sure that we are capturing all of the investments in transportation that we are making across the Commonwealth. Next slide, please. We plan on releasing a draft CIP subject to our board approval for that effort, May 18th, and that we have a public comment period for MassDOT CIP that will last May 18th through June 8th. It'll be available, the document will be available both in a PDF format and an interactive format posted online at the mass.gov/CIP website. Folks can also comment by email. They can leave a comment on the online public comment tool. And we will have 6 virtual public meetings held across the Commonwealth. And we anticipate that the comment period will close June 9th, and we'll present the results of that at our June board meeting to our board. Next slide, please. This is just a snapshot of that online comment tool that we have developed for the CIP. It is very interactive, and it really allows users, they can filter for projects by the division, like if they know it's a highway project or an MBT, even a rail project, a transit project, they can filter by municipality, by the MPO, by the type of CIP program or cost, or even enter the address and it'll pop up. So it does allow a lot of flexibility. It is very user friendly. We've done an awful lot of work to try to improve it over time. So this online comment tool will be available when we make the draft CIP public. Next slide. This was just the key milestones that we follow for the development of the CIP, and I will not go through this in detail. I will now turn it over to Jillian to talk about the MBTA.
Actually, before I have Jillian go, Michelle, I know there was a lot in there. We'll make sure this presentation members have it. Does anyone have any questions for Michelle? Because there's a lot in there, and I know we talk in a lot of, acronyms and things like that, but does anyone have any questions? And obviously, after we share those with members, they have questions, we can reach out to Derek, myself, David, or Michelle. We can answer them. But does anyone have any questions before I turn it over to Jillian? All right. Thank you, Michelle. Jillian, why don't you go ahead?
All right. Thank you, everyone. It is technically still good morning. I will be quick so that we hopefully don't go too long today. I'm going to quickly walk through the MBTA's proposed fiscal year 23 to 27 CIP, including how we developed the plan. And then at the end of my presentation, I will introduce the 23 to 27 TIP and the 22 to 26 TIP amendment, which are currently both posted on the MPO's website. Slide, please. This is just a level setting slide. I think everyone knows this, but the CIP, or Capital Investment Plan, is a short-term, financially constrained investment program that funds the planning, construction, and capital maintenance of all of the assets across the MBTA. It's a rolling 5-year plan that we update annually. Next slide, please. As Michelle mentioned, this year the MBTA published a standalone or MBTA only CIP. It is also the first 5-year plan that has been published since fiscal years 20 to 24. As I think we all remember, the 21 and 22 CIPs were both 1-year capital plans due to the ongoing COVID pandemic, and focused mostly on continuing programs already underway and some key targeted investments for the future. Next slide, please. So each year, the MBTA undertakes a robust process similar to MassDOT that strives to build a capital plan that reflects a balanced portfolio of investments. The key steps in developing this plan are outlined here. The process begins with the collection of updated cash flows for our existing projects, which inform our understanding of our available sources and our estimated funding level across the 5-year window. We conduct a call for projects where sponsors from MBTA departments submit requests for funds. These requests include new capital projects and/or additional funds for existing projects. All requests are scored by small cross-functional evaluation teams using 8 criteria that include system preservation, mobility, cost effectiveness, environmental and health effects, policy support, social equity, economic impact, and safety. The CIP is sorted into distinct programs, and in advance of prioritizing all of our investments, we set program sizes based on agency goals and priorities. We then hold prioritization meetings with MBTA leadership to determine which projects are priorities within each CIP program. Projects are then incorporated into the 5-year capital plan based on their priority, our agency capacity, and our availability of funds. And then the final step in the process is the release of the proposed CIP for public comment, which is currently taking place right now. And following the public comment period, the plan will be finalized and presented to the full MBTA board for approval. Next slide, please. The MBTA CIP, similar to MassDOT, is referred to as a priority-driven investment strategy and remains aligned with the priority and program structure that is consistent across MassDOT. New this cycle for the MBTA, the 23 to 27 CIP includes 2 overarching priorities. First is the reliability and modernization of the transit system, which we have merged together this CIP cycle. And the second is the expansion of the transportation network to increase capacity and multimodal options. The next level of organization or below those overarching priorities are programs. Our CIP includes 10 investment programs, which, as I mentioned, are sized annually based on agency priorities and available resources. As listed here, the programs under reliability and modernization were reset this year and are now largely asset-based. And the programs under expansion remain the same and fund the planning, design, and construction of key expansion projects, including South Coast Rail and GLX. Next slide, please. This slide offers a quick high-level summary of the sources that support the MBTA's capital program, which are broken down into 4 primary categories. Starting with federal funds, the MBTA receives federal formula funding through 3 programs administered by the FTA, all with their own unique goals and objectives. These should all be familiar to everyone in this group, but they are the 5307 program, the 5339 program, and the 5337 program. In addition, the MBTA is eligible and is often awarded competitive funding grants from a range of federal agencies, including USDOT, FTA, and FRA. And once awarded, those funds are reflected as sources in the CIP. Moving on to state sources, the MBTA currently receives state funding, as Michelle mentioned, as either Commonwealth Rail Enhancement Bonds or Commonwealth General Obligation Bond Proceeds or Bond Cap. Both of these support specific projects such as South Coast Rail Phase 1, GLX, the Red Line, Orange Line vehicles and infrastructure improvements, and the procurement of bi-level commuter rail coaches. The third type of funding included in the CIP are what we call MBTA sources. The first subcategory of MBTA sources are bonds, which broadly include taxable, tax-exempt, and sustainability bonds, which are made available each year to support the capital program. A second component of our MBTA sources are Build America Bureau loans, which the MBTA can pursue to support large federally eligible capital projects. There are 2 programs that we are eligible under, TIFIA and RIF, both which offer loans for different types of work depending on one's railroad focused, one's transit focused. There are 2 more MBTA sources. First is operating budget transfers, which are funds that pass through from the MBTA's operating budget to the capital program. And finally, there's the Capital Maintenance Fund, which is a limited fund held by the authority that may be used at the discretion of the CFO. The final type of funding that the MBTA receives are reimbursable sources or funding from outside sources that are established through partnerships or formal agreements to complete a specific scope of work. Next slide, please. Oops, sorry. Thank you. The proposed 5-year capital plan reflects roughly $9.4 billion in programmed sources, shown here broken out by the 4 main source categories that we just covered. As a quick summary, the federal fund assumptions that we use to develop our 5-year CIP do reflect our current estimates for federal formula funding included under the bipartisan infrastructure law. Regarding MBTA sources, which we use to support not only the 20% match for federal projects, but also MBTA only funded projects, our underlying assumptions of available bonds and loans are aligned with the MBTA's bonding capacity and coverage ratio, which for developing the CIP assumes $590 million per year until fiscal year 25, and then $500 million per year in 26 and beyond. For state funds, these sources are tied to specific projects, and the amount available is aligned with the cash flows of those projects. And then finally, reimbursable sources, as mentioned, are based on specific agreements with outside entities, and those are also aligned with specific cash flows. Next slide, please. Continuing on sources, as we all know, the bipartisan infrastructure law reauthorized surface transportation programs for federal fiscal years 22 to 26 and provide capital funding to public transit through 2 main channels. First is federal formula programs, and second are discretionary or competitive grant programs. We'll look at our federal formula funding levels under this new authorization on the next couple of slides. But in addition, this bill also reauthorized a significant number of competitive grant programs. We expect these competitive grant programs to run annual funding rounds over the 5-year timeframe of the authorization. The MBTA will need to develop and submit an application for each opportunity during each funding round and will compete with transit agencies and other public entities across the country. The MBTA is already and will continue to aggressively pursue all eligible discretionary funding opportunities, and we will continue to use the annual CIP development process to establish the pool of projects for which we may develop discretionary grant applications. Next slide, please. Looking at the formula programs, the bipartisan infrastructure law did not make significant changes to the overall federal formula programs or the eligibilities, but it did establish a new baseline for federal formula funding levels. Previously, as everyone did, the MBTA estimated our funding levels based on the FAST Act funding levels. And as I mentioned in this CIP, we did update those to reflect bill funding levels. In the CIP, we are estimating that the MBTA will receive an additional $580 million in federal formula funds over the entire 5-year window of the authorization. I will also note that this slide reflects our initial funding estimates under bill. About a week ago, FTA released their federal fiscal year 22 apportionment tables. The actual amount that the MBTA expects to receive in federal fiscal year 22 went down very slightly from the $416 million that we have on this slide to 415.4. That number will be reflected in the TIP, but it is not reflected on this slide. And the MBTA is also working with our transit partners to finalize the split letters to nail down that number. So that is still getting refined. Next slide, please. So jumping back and to look at the 5-year CIP. Sorry. So this slide offers a high-level summary of the 5-year program. As drafted, it includes 552 capital projects, representing $9.4 billion in program spend, with projects being executed by 32 MBTA departments. Reliability and modernization investments account for the majority of the projects and expected spend across the 5-year window, but there are also 12 expansion projects representing just under $1 billion of spend. On the right-hand side, you can see overall priorities as reflected by program size, which demonstrate an ongoing commitment to investing in the MBTA's vehicles and guideway signal and power assets, followed by the agency's maintenance and administrative facilities. Next slide, please. This slide shows overall investment by mode, and on the right-hand side are the top 15 projects as defined by fiscal year 23 to 27 program spend. Many of these are well-known underway investments and include South Coast Rail, GLX, Fair Transformation, a number of underway vehicle procurements such as the Red Line, Orange Line vehicles, the Green Line Type 10s, hybrid buses, bi-level coaches. It also includes the Quincy Bus Facility Modernization Project, the Longfellow Approach, the Safety Critical Green Line Train Protection Project, ATC implementation, and the North Station Drawbridge 1 replacement project. Next slide, please. Before leaving the 5-year CIP, I did want to once again mention that the MBTA has developed and released a standalone CIP document, which is shown here and which is available currently on our MBTA website. The document is structured around 3 major components. First is an overview of the CIP. Second are 1-page summaries of each CIP program. And then finally, there's a detailed listing of all the capital projects included in the 5-year plan. Next slide, please. I did also want to mention that in addition to publishing the CIP document, we are also inviting public engagement and comment through multiple channels. Our 3 public meetings have already taken place. However, we are still accepting comments through our online public comment tool and accepting comments via email or letter. The public comment period is scheduled to wrap up on April 25th. Next slide, please. One more. Thanks. So moving to look quickly at the draft 22 to 26 TIP amendment and the 23 to 27 TIP. This slide offers a high-level summary of what is included, and the detail, as I mentioned, the TIP tables have been published on the website. There are a total of 79 projects currently included on the draft TIP. There are also 5 projects funded through the MPO's Community Connections program and 11.8 million in CMAQ funding for the Columbus Ave Phase 2 project. This slide also shows the amount by TIP program. I will note that the other federal program is currently showing up as the largest. I do want to flag that this is based off of a financing program estimate and will be further refined as the projects are identified and as loans are finalized. The largest formula funding program included in the TIP is the Revenue Vehicle Program, followed by Station and Facilities and Bridge and Tunnel. On the right-hand side of the slide, we are also showing the program TIP amounts by mode, which demonstrate consistent modal investments as the same as the 5-year CIP. And as Michelle mentioned, I do want to note that the CIP and TIP, while they very much speak to each other, it does not help to compare the numbers in the TIP to the numbers in the CIP document. As a reminder, the TIP represents planned obligations and the CIP represents planned cash flows. So they do look at these projects slightly different, and therefore you can't make a direct correlation between the 2 of them. Next slide, please. Looking at the FTA formula funds, there are a total of 2.85 billion programmed across what is technically 6 years, because it includes the 22 TIP amendment and the 5-year 23 to 27 TIP. This includes funding for projects that were previously included on the MBTA's TIP, but also includes 38 new projects, a couple of which are highlighted here, and include the E-Branch Accessibility and Capacity Improvements Project, design funding for the Arborway Bus Facility, system-wide tunnel flood mitigation project, which funds and supports planning and infrastructure improvements to make the tunnel network more resilient, and then bus priority project construction funding, which will continue to support additional bus priority infrastructure investments across the region. Next slide, please. I do want to note that consistent with last year, you will also see in the TIP documents that we have identified some projects that may be potentially funded using federal RIF and TIFIA loans. The MBTA continues to explore the use of federal loans through the Build America Bureau to finance certain capital projects at a lower interest rate. These projects are included on the TIP for informational purposes and are subject to the approval of funding through the CIP process. And if and when additional federal loans are utilized, like PTC, ATC, or the Fiber Resiliency Project, additional information will be provided through the future TIP and/or a future TIP amendment. Next slide, please. That wraps up my portion of the presentation. This is just a quick look at the upcoming timeline or notable timelines around the CIP and TIP, which we are looking to wrap up in the next month to 2 months.
All right, does anyone have any questions for Jay? Looks like Jay does, and Daniel, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Jillian. First, I mean, we're always supportive of investment in transit. I think the T has just been grown a great deal in their capacity and their thought process from, I know where they were 6, 7, 8 years ago. So I just want to say kudos to all of your work and all the team's work in getting us there. That said, I kind of have to point out, and some of this message, I think, from the mayor and some of his colleagues, Everett and, a lot of our neighbors and colleagues up and down the North Shore are undergoing truly transformational change. Everett, Chelsea, Lynn, Revere, tens of thousands of units of housing, tens of thousands of new jobs, change that hasn't been seen in this region in over a century. And I think looking at the CIP, it's hard to see where the need is being met. There's some kind of really glaring omissions. The first being, I think, commuter rail, transformation, regional rail, electrification, and the other being the Silver Line. And these are both projects that have been talked about, have gone through, the Lower Mystic Regional Working Group. The Silver Line has an active planning process going on today. We've had the regional rail process. We've had the MBTA board a couple of years ago, make the some directive to advance those projects. And they're critical to communities like Everett and Revere and Chelsea to support all the things that we're doing, all the skin in the game that we have, whether it's welcoming that new housing, changes to our zoning to allow greater density, less parking, things of that nature. But we need the support. We need the support of targeted investments in the commuter rail, in the bus system, to continue to do that. And I think that's what's sort of a glaring omission from this CIP. And also a major issue of the mayor right now and some of the other mayors up and down the North Shore. So again, I want to say, thank you for all your hard work. It's always good to see this amount of investment going on. But this is a tough pill to swallow to really not see those things truly represented here. I'm sure we'll have some more discussion about that in the coming weeks. So thank you.
Thanks, Jay. Daniel, and then Stephen.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And thanks, Jillian, for the thorough and comprehensive overview. I will just say that that Jay makes some good points. But the main question I wanted to ask or to understand is regarding the reference to the Green Line extension in the CIP for 23 to 27. Can you tell me which part of the Green Line extension that's referencing?
Jillian, do you want to answer that?
Sorry, I muted and then I couldn't unmute myself. So the existing cash flows are for the current scope of work associated with the current Green Line extension that is currently opening and then planned to open. So it is the existing project scope.
Meaning Green Line in phase 1.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Steve.
Hi, Steve Olenoff, Trick alternate. Yeah, I want to continue with what Jay was saying about, and we should be saying regional rail, not commuter rail. We're supposed to be transforming our commuter rail system into a regional rail system. We're supposed to be electrifying it. We don't see that happening. I want to congratulate the MBTA for doing a great job on the bus end of things. And I think you should really say that the bus system will be electrified and net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2040, 10 years ahead of when the state targets are. But while that great stuff is happening on the bus end, there seems to be nothing happening on the regional rail end. And I was very upset to see a picture of a diesel locomotive. We're supposed to be getting rid of those diesel locomotives and buying EMUs. And yet in the CIP, we're buying more locomotives. We're buying more of the old coaches. I brought this up years ago about why are we buying more coaches when we should be replacing them with EMUs. And I was told, well, they can get we can sell them when we don't need them, when we finally get to the EMUs. But in the meantime, we need to keep up good rolling stock. You know, I don't think the T should be buying another diesel locomotive ever. We should be getting rid of them. So it's really sad that we just nothing is happening with the electrification of the regional rail and that transformation from a commuter rail system into a regional rail system. Thanks.
Thanks, Steve. Anyone else? All right, I don't see any other hands, so thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Jillian. So now why don't we move to, I believe, the last agenda item before we adjourn. Are there any member items that anyone has? Brian, go ahead.
Thanks, Steve. I just want to mention that the MBTA Board of Directors has set their meetings on Thursday mornings, like today. There's 3 subcommittees meeting today that I usually try to participate in, but couldn't because of this. So the request is that, you know, every effort be made to keep these on the first and third Thursdays as opposed to the second and fourth, so that those of us that have to be in 2 places at once can do the best we can. Thank you.
All right. Thanks for letting us know, Brian. Anyone else? Steve, you have a member item?
Yeah, so I really wanted to, I thought we kind of left the previous subject really fast, because I noticed on the list of all the highway programs, the Canton interchange was mentioned there. There's a new project there, $6 million for Canton interim interchange improvements. Can anyone tell me what that's all about?
Maria, you still on? Do you know what that is?
Yeah, is this a Canton interchange you're wondering about, or?
Yeah, on
there are
page, yeah,
projects-
it's on page 4 for the 610541 project number in 2024, $6,169,000.
Steve, what document are you looking at?
The 2327 TIP statewide highway programming draft.
Yep.
Go ahead, Marie.
Yep, 610541.
Right.
Yep. This is on the draft 24 STIP. It's interim interchange improvements.
What does that exactly mean?
I think it's not a lot of work. It's only $6 million, I believe. I'm looking at it right now. And it's going to be done in-house in highway design. But it hasn't started yet. So I can find out some more information if you'd like.
So I'm concerned because the Canton interchange project, which has been over, you know, it's been longer than 20. A lot of people on this MPO probably weren't even around when this project was started, and we're still waiting.
I was young back then.
Yeah, and so was I. I think I'm really concerned that if we're trying to fix these 2 bridges, which are really, what are they, 59 years old at this point, and I don't think they've ever had any work on them ever. If we're trying to fix them when we really should be replacing them, that's a big concern that the MassDOT has done it before, the way they spent money repairing things which they knew they were going to get rid of and totally replace. And here's another instance, it seems, of spending $6 million to stitch something together, these bridges together, and to repair them. They'll still remain functionally obsolete and just as much death traps as they are now with the dead man's curve right after it. And they need to be replaced with those flyovers as a safety reason. And that project's been, you know, years ago, long range transportation plan, it put it way off. And I remember there were 4 sections, and it was put off until between 2015 and 2020. And we were disappointed that it was put off for so much, but that's come and gone. And the project still hasn't been done. Those bridges are still falling apart, and the safety concerns are still there. So I don't think we should be wasting money repairing something we should be replacing.
All right, so Marie, why don't you follow up with specifics on the project that is on there with Steve? Either get it through to Matt or what have you. Steve, this is not the right, that's a much bigger discussion you're bringing up, past votes by the MPO and stuff, and it's more appropriate for the tip, and certainly not under one of our last items of the day for member items. So
Yeah,
obviously,
I just missed that. I thought it was
All
a
right.
part of the discussion.
my point
Sorry.
is like, let's just remember to bring that up when we actually have the relevant discussion for that. So, but in the meantime, Marie, please find him the information on that current project if you can. All right.
Thank you.
Well, yep. So Marie answered in the chat. She's muted, but she'll look into it, Steve. Okay, and then we can have that bigger discussion you can bring up when we start, talking about the tip again in more detail. All right. Any other member items? All right. Seeing none, Jonathan, do you want to do a vote to adjourn, please?
Sure. Stephen Wolfel.
Well, actually, we got to do the vote first. Does someone want to make a motion? I think it's Brian to adjourn. And is there a second?
Move to adjourn.
And I assume Tom is second to adjourn, right, Tom? All right.
Second.
All right, Jonathan, go ahead. Read the roll, please.
Stephen Wolfel.
Yes.
Sorry, just generally speaking, we've just done without objection, we're adjourned just to save time.
See, I don't know who brought that up. Is that Matt?
It was, yes.
Every MPO does this different to me. Some don't do a vote, some do a vote, so I never remember. So I just
Fair enough.
figured we're doing it this way today, so.
Okay.
So
Stephen
Jonathan,
Wolfel.
you start the roll, we'll do it, and just remind me next time. Everyone does it different. So yes.
Okay. Stephen Wolfel.
Yes.
Marie Rose.
Yes.
John Romano.
Yes.
Jillian Linnell.
Yes.
Sarah Lee.
Yes.
Eric Barassa.
Looks like Eric has dropped off.
Okay.
And I knew Eric had to leave, so.
Okay. Brian Kane.
Brian Kane, yes.
Leonard Diggins.
Leonard Diggins, yes.
Jim Fitzgerald. I'm sorry, Bill Conroy. Bill Conroy. Somebody unmute Bill Conroy, please.
Maybe having an issue with the unmuting, so maybe just circle back.
Okay. Jim Fitzgerald.
Bill Conroy, yes.
Oh, thank you. Jim Fitzgerald.
Yep.
No, that's okay. I just thought I never, no, but I mean,
Bill, can you mute yourself, Bill Conroy?
We're all set.
Okay. Jim Fitzgerald, I believe, said yes. Jay Monty.
Yes.
David Kozis.
Yes.
Daniel Amstutz.
Daniel Amstutz, yes.
I know Heather Hamilton has left. Tom Bent.
Yes.
Austin Saganowitz.
Austin's dropped out of the meeting.
Okay. Dennis Giambetti.
Dennis Giambetti, yes.
Darlene Nguyen.
Darlene Nguyen, yes.
Jennifer Constable.
Jan Constable, yes.
Peter Pelletier.
Looks like Peter has dropped out as well.
Okay. And Tom O'Rourke.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
Motion carries, Mr. Chair.
Guys, thanks, John. Thank you, everyone. We got through a lot today. Everyone stay safe, take it easy, have a good holiday weekend, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.